Yo, what's up, everybody? We got a crazy video. This is for the fan favorites, all of my subscribers, all nine of you guys. I know this would mean a lot to you, so here we go. So, we're going to review the founding fathers as superheroes. So, there's a lot of similarities here. I'd never thought to think about this because I'm an adult, and don't really care about superheroes. Just kidding. Just making fun of you guys a little bit, but there's actually a startling number of similarities. And once the idea kind of burrowed in my head, I was like, "Oh, this is real. This is real." They had lives like superheroes in a lot of ways. So hopefully you enjoy. I'll be honest, full disclosure, don't know superheroes nearly as well as I know the history here. So please forgive me if my statements on superheroes are wrong. I don't think they will be, but it's my impressions of superheroes colored a lot of this. So yeah, so there you go. So let's get started. I'll try and keep these pretty short, but up first we got George Washington. So who do we think he would be? I think it's pretty obvious. We got Captain America in front of George Washington, no less. So George Washington's Captain America. Now, why do I say that? Well, they're both kind of the embodiment of their nation, right? Captain America's supposed to, if it wasn't too obvious, represent America, and George Washington kind of does that for us in a lot of ways. They both kind of either gave up power or they're reluctant to take it. As far as I understand, Captain America is reluctant to, take that mantle on. And, he passes it on to the black guy, Anthony Mackie. Classic George Washington right there. He could have been president for life and set that standard, but he didn't. He passed it on. They're both physically commanding. George Washington was like 6'3", and, back then that'd be like 6'10". Now, if that makes sense. Captain America's buff as fuck. Chris Evans is huge. So they're both, not just like larger than life mythically, but, physically as well. They're both warriors for their causes. They lead from the front. They fight themselves. And I think perhaps the, best parallels that they both hold, duty, honor, perseverance, these things are very sacred. And, obviously they both believed in that. So yeah, I think the parallel, that one's pretty obvious, I would say. They're the kind of like, they're both do-gooders, but they're also the very, serious. They're not the comic relief. George Washington is not the comic relief. He's the very serious, brave, kind of the no-nonsense, almost like Superman in a way, where it's like, he's so concerned with doing good and, doing his duty. So, yeah, I would say George Washington is Captain America. All right, up next, we got Thomas Jefferson. Okay, who do we think? I'm going to say Thomas Jefferson is Iron Man. So ridiculous, but let me tell you why. So, like Iron Man, Tony Stark, their inventor, Jefferson was an inventor and architect. He kind of, pioneered a lot of agricultural tools. He designed his, fancy Monticello estate. And Tony Stark, of course, has Stark Industries. But more importantly, it's kind of like they're like the quick-witted and sassy, characters. Jefferson is kind of this like too cool for school, charismatic. I'm the real deal, and that's the vibe I get from Tony Stark. The other one, I don't have it here, but I should list is the Civil War. How it's between Captain America and Iron Man. Well, that's, in real life, Jefferson and Washington were not big fans of each other, and Jefferson actually resigned from his cabinet. So yeah, that's another parallel that works really well. They're both contradictory figures, Tony Stark and Jefferson. Jefferson's the most, in a lot of ways, radical of the founding fathers in terms of his ideology, his support of revolutionary France, and his general lack of faith in human governance. And so he also, though, is kind of represents in a lot of ways the prototypical Confederacy. You know, he's more states' rights. He's not as anti-slavery as Hamilton and Washington. Earlier in his career, he was, to be fair to Jefferson, he actually did a lot to try and get slavery abolished, both in the Northwest Territory and in Virginia itself. But over time, he seemed to actually, kind of shift the other way. And Tony Stark is also this contradictory figure because he's kind of like this asshole, like, superhero, though, right? You wouldn't think those two would go together. He's kind of like, what? He's not like a do-gooder in the same way that other superheroes are, if that makes sense. So that's why I would say, they're both kind of contradictory, right? They're like heroes, and in some sense, not villains so much, but they're almost like anti-heroes. And then the other thing is they're both obsessed with progress. Like I said, Jefferson's kind of like this radical Democrat. He's, he doesn't even think that the Constitution should be binding for more than 20 years, which is just ridiculous. And in the same way, Stark is, now to be fair, maybe he's more concerned with making money off Stark Industries in the, at least Iron Man 1, which is my favorite Iron Man. But, they're obsessed with progress, whether that's their company, politics, whatever it is, for mankind. So that to me is why I would say that. So Jefferson is Iron Man. James Madison. Okay, who do we think James Madison is? I'm going Professor X. Again, another ridiculous idea here. But here's why I say that. So one, they are both physically scrawny weaklings. So Professor X, of course, is in a wheelchair. In this picture, he looks kind of jacked, big bald head. But, suffice it to say, he's kind of a weakling. And James Madison is the same. He's the shortest president ever. He was like 5'4". You can imagine him standing next to George Washington. George Washington's like a foot taller than him. And he's kind of like this mousy character. But at the same time, they're both like genius masterminds. So Madison basically writes the rough draft of the Constitution. And, regardless of what you have to say about Madison or the Founding Fathers or America at large, I mean, it is undeniable that our Constitution is a work of art. It's, basically the longest lasting continuous government in the world, which is incredible. And, it is a work of genius. Regardless what you think, all the liberals are, I guess it would just be liberals in this case. You can nitpick here and there. I've heard all the theories on why it's a slaveholder document, on why it's about, an elitist commercial group. All of this, it's all BS. It's a work of genius. So, in the same way, Professor X is kind of like the, mastermind of the X-Men, right? He's kind of organizing the whole group. He's doing battle with Magneto with his mind. So perfect parallels right there. And they seek balance. Professor X he's trying to advocate for the mutants and the humans want to kill them and stuff like that. He wants the balance. In the same way Madison, he wants balance between branches of government, right? The three branches of government. They're both very concerned in the same way about rights and liberties. Madison kind of, in a lot of ways, writes the Bill of Rights, and in the same way, Professor X wants to make sure mutants aren't being discriminated against. So they're concerned about rights and liberties, and then also they're kind of the mentor to the new generation. So Madison, of all the founding fathers, I think lives the longest. He lives into the 1830s. And so he kind of oversees the second generation of, founding fathers, you could call them. I know we don't usually tend to think of him that way, but he's kind of like simultaneously one of the old guard and the new guard. So Professor X, of course, is a mentor to all the X-Men. So perfect comparison there. That's actually, I think, the strongest one. Next, we have Benjamin Franklin. So I'm going to go Benjamin Franklin is Nick Fury. And the reason I say that is they're both African American. But they're masters of diplomacy and strategy. So, Benjamin Franklin, both before, during, and after the war, is kind of working in England, he's working in France, and he's trying to get support for the American cause, both within England and France. He's strategizing on how to, hey, what propaganda are we going to make in the colonies to get them to come together, like the Join or Die cartoon. That's originally from the French and Indian War, but it's used for, colonial solidarity. If you watch the John Adams miniseries, he's like behind the scenes during the Second Continental Congress. And, so he's just kind of like a master diplomat strategician, or a strategoi, whatever the term. It's eluding me right now. But, Nick Fury is kind of that for the Avengers. He's like he's not fighting the battles necessarily, but he's coordinating everything. He's like the master strategy guy. He has an eye patch. Benjamin Franklin doesn't have an eye patch, but you get the idea. The other thing is they're both kind of behind the scenes. So, they're not on stage with the glory like, George Washington or Iron Man or someone like this. But they're kind of behind the scenes. It doesn't mean they're not important, but they're just more behind the scenes. They're both, visionary network builders. That one's kind of a stretch, to be honest, but you get the idea. It's similar to diplomacy and strategy in the same way that Nick Fury's building up S.H.I.E.L.D. Franklin is scheming on how to get the colonies united, 20 years before the revolution. So the other thing is they both kind of have this air of wisdom, but they're also rule breakers. Like Nick Fury is not like a by-the-book kind of guy in the same way that maybe a Superman is. And similarly, Benjamin Franklin is kind of like a sexual degenerate. Like he's just kind of, fucking all these bitches and stuff. So they're breaking, the conventional rules where like John Adams or Captain America might not do so, if that makes sense. So great comparison here. Let's move on. Alexander Hamilton. Great portrait here. I think my favorite portrait of any founding father, to be honest with you. And I'm going to say Alexander Hamilton is the Caped Crusader himself, Batman. And here's why. So they're like rich alpha geniuses, and they get play too. Like, I'll be real with Batman, I'm not sure like if he's like a total playboy, but like he's Bruce Wayne in his real time, so I doubt the comics show him like having sex all the time. But in Dark Knight, Rachel really wants him. She's kind of busted. But I'm sure he gets tons of play. And in the same way, Alexander Hamilton got a lot of play. I mean, not only was he he was married, which is at least one down, but his sister-in-law wanted to smash him, and then he also banged this other woman named Mariah Reynolds. So he's just, fucking his lights out, crazy guy, but they're both rich, they're alpha, and they're geniuses. So number two is that they're both very involved in finance. Now, I know that, what is it? Is it Wayne Industries? I don't know exactly what it's called, but, Bruce is very involved in, I think, at least developing real estate. Please tell me that's right. But in the same way, Hamilton's kind of concocting these financial schemes for America in the early republic. So he's, establishing the national bank. He's, being like, hey, we need to assume states' debts and invest in manufacturing and all this stuff. And not a lot of people get it, but like it's ultimately, very beneficial. The other thing is they're relentless workaholics. If you've seen the Hamilton play, you'll know that it's like, how do you write while you're running out of time? That's like gay, but but he wrote a lot. He did a lot of stuff. He was working day and night. And in the same way, Batman is like that. It's like he's got his personal life and his private life. He's like working his ass off. And they kind of have these dual personas. Like Hamilton is in the public, but then he's also like having the affairs in private and having to confess. And, Bruce Wayne and Batman are obviously the two sides of the coin there. The other thing, and I'm going off of some research for this, so please correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong, but they're both very contentious as far as I know. Like Hamilton beefed with everyone. He beefed with Adams, Jefferson, Madison, even Washington. Washington's like his best friend in a lot of ways, but even he and Washington didn't get along on occasion, or at least Hamilton didn't get along with them. And my understanding is that Batman does not get along very well with people in the Justice League. Especially in the comics or the show, he's kind of like in a lot of ways, he's grizzled. We'll get to that description later, but yeah, they're both very contentious. Like I said, if that's wrong, let me know, but that's my understanding. All right, let's move on to John Adams, my favorite founding father, and coincidentally, Wolverine is my favorite superhero. Now, I will say, the reason why I like Wolverine is just because he looks cool. He is like my favorite design, and he was fun to play in games when I was younger. I also like the movie, I think it's like X-Men Origins Wolverine, whatever shows him in like World War One. I watched that as a kid and I was like, wow, that's sick, actually. So, big fan of Wolverine. But so why do I say that John Adams is Wolverine? Well, they're both fiery and stubborn. They both kind of have like very like conviction, and they're like, grrr. They're willing to blow up in your fucking face, and it's hard to convince them out of something they believe. The others, they're grizzled but intelligent. Wolverine is like, he's famous. He's got the stubble and the sideburns. He's grizzled. And John Adams is that way. Like, when he's very blunt, he doesn't have that diplomatic strength that Franklin has. He's like, I'm going to tell you how it is. But they're both very intelligent, and that gets underlooked. And that leads into the third one, which is they're both underrated. Now, maybe you'll say that's not the case for Wolverine, and if so, fine. But Adams is definitely underrated as far as founding fathers go. Like I said, he's my favorite. I think he did, except for George himself, Mr. Washington, I think he did more for the Republic, at least at expense of his personal life, than anyone except George. So, very underrated. In the same way, I think Wolverine's underrated, like, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman are kind of like the big three, but I always thought something was really cool about Wolverine, especially his retro costume here. So, underrated. The other thing is they're both resilient. So Adams has, how many highs and lows of his career? Constant public criticism, constantly feeling like he's failing, constantly, having to leave his family. And, he just soldiered on the entire time. He worked his way up, became vice president, president. He did it all. So, in the same way, Wolverine has recharging health powers. So, resilient, you could say. And then this last one is a stretch, I'm not going to lie. But, Adams was a team player. He could be a team player. But he often knew when to stand alone. So, like in Congress, when they're declaring independence, he's like pushing independence very early. Maybe too early, some would say. But at the same time, he's repping his country more than anything. So he's like a federalist, but he's not afraid to critique the federalists and be like, no, like the other side's doing something good by this, and draw their ire. Him and his son were notorious for that in a good way. So, and the reason why I say it's a stretch is because my research showed that Wolverine did this as well. That he'll work with the team, but he also prefers sometimes to go alone. So I think it fits. If not, like I said, just trash me in the comments. But there you go. All right, next up, John's cousin, Sam. Sam Adams, a lot of people are familiar with. I'm going to go Sam Adams is the Incredible Hulk. Okay, now why do I say that? Well, one, they're filled with rage. Sam Adams is filled with rage. And he has a great quote, and I think it's something we should all reflect on. He says, "What really counts is not the majority, but a relentless, irate minority bent on changing things." I'm not getting the quote exactly, but you get the idea. He was the one pushing for rebellion against Britain, years before 1776. Like in 1770, he's talking about this stuff. And so he's full of rage, like he's just trashing on Britain to everyone and trying to stir up rage amongst everyone to get them to kind of throw off the chains of Britain. So, similarly, once they get going, they can't be stopped. Adams is kind of like in these emotional fears. You can't stop him. Like, once independence got planted in his head, it was over. Like, independence was going to happen. And, the Hulk can't really like go back to Bruce Banner at will. So, speaking of Bruce Banner, they have like two sides to them. So Adams is like, while he's a very like emotional character, he's plotting and scheming in the background. So he's organizing the Sons of Liberty, setting up the committees of correspondence. He's got the smart, like intelligent science ness of Bruce Banner, but he's also got the rage he needs when he needs to go crazy mode. The last thing, and to be fair, they all kind of have this, but Adams especially, Hulk is trying to fend off the government, and the government wants to like stop him, and he's bringing down helicopters and stuff. And, in the same way, Adams is kind of like the big rebel. Like when Lexington and Concord happened, they came to arrest him, and for good reason. So that's why I think Sam Adams is the Incredible Hulk. Moving on, we got Paul Revere. Now, everyone knows Paul Revere. And what's funny is he's actually not like that important of a figure. Just to be honest, all respect to him. But that's why I'm going to have him be Flash. And not just any Flash. He's the Ezra Miller. He's Ezra Miller Flash. And the reason for that is that he's transsexual. But he's also known for being fast. So the Midnight Ride. One, if by land, two, if by seas, flying through the villages and letting everyone know. He's fast. He's like the messenger. He may not be, killing people on the battlefield, but he's like the quick messenger. Kind of makes sense, right? So, all right, we'll leave it there. All right, second to last, we have Patrick Henry. This is the give me liberty or give me death guy you might remember from school. And I'm going to have Patrick Henry as Thor. Okay, so why Thor? Well, they have a thunderous personality. I know that's a little on the nose, but Henry was known for being one of, if not the best orators, speakers, that means in all of America at the time. And that's quite a feat because you've got, Adams is one of them. Jefferson's not really an orator, but you have a lot of people who are really good at speaking, really genius. John Dickinson is another orator. And so to be known as the best in the entire country is, that's quite a lot. And he just had such a sense of gravity to him. People like at the ratification constitutional convention of Virginia, he walks in and everyone's like, oh shit, it's Patrick Henry. He actually opposed the Constitution, which leads me to point 2, which is protector of homeland. Thor is protecting Asgard. And in the same way, Patrick Henry is very passionate about states' rights. And that's why he's against the Constitution. He's like very protective over Virginia, doesn't want to see Virginia kind of lose its sovereignty. In the same way that Thor likes Asgard. So the last is they're kind of bold and unapologetic. It kind of maybe goes without saying, or, there's not too much to elaborate on there, but Henry is not someone who's playing the diplomatic game at all. Like, not at all. And, my understanding of Thor is that he's rough around the edges. He doesn't understand, the human world. That he's a god, right? He's not fucking worrying about being diplomatic and all this stuff. So that's why I have him here. So last, not really a founding father, but, he kind of is in a lot of ways. He didn't exist at that time, but he's the most important American figure ever, so I think he should count. And of course, this is obvious, but Abraham Lincoln is Superman. This is kind of like a anime Superman more than a comic, but whatever. This one fits so well, and the reason is because they both have these humble, folksy origins. Superman is from Smallville, and, Lincoln's born in a log cabin. And there's like these kind of folk guys, Lincoln's chopping wood and floating on a raft in the Mississippi. And Superman is doing whatever he does as a kid. But secondly, they're kind of this symbol of hope and justice. Superman wears it on his chest. And for us, Lincoln is the ultimate, he's the he's justice, right? He's the end of slavery. He's the hope of a brighter future. That's not maybe how I'd think about him, but you get the idea. They both also have this unbreakable moral compass. They're like so strong in their convictions, except when Superman snaps Zod's neck, I'm told. But they're like so concerned about that. They won't break it. It's like Desmond Doss. Even if it's expedient, they're like, I'm not breaking this. Lincoln, that's not entirely true. I think he was a little bit smarter than that, but you get the idea. Lastly, they're kind of a martyr for their causes. So obviously, Lincoln gets shot in the head and killed. And I know that Superman doesn't have like a canon-ending death, but like in a lot of ones, he dies, if I'm not mistaken. Like Batman versus Superman, which is funny. And then lastly, they're like the most powerful of all of these. So in the same way that Superman's like the strongest superhero, Lincoln was like the strongest president, both in terms of power he possessed, probably until FDR. But at least compared to all these other figures, he had the most power. He had the most he structured America, I guess, more like in a more unique and distinct way than maybe anyone else here. So that's why I've got Abe Lincoln as Superman. So that's it. I think that's a pretty exhaustive list. Let me know if there's anyone I forgot. Let me know if you disagree. I almost put Ben Franklin as Green Lantern. So let me know what you think, if that makes sense. Which do you think was the best comparison? Which was the worst? I would say the best is probably Abe as Superman, and maybe the worst is or John Adams as Wolverine. Actually, I don't know. It's probably the Flash Ezra Miller one. But regardless, let me know what you think in the comments. And thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications when I post every 2 months. And thank you so much. See you later.